going to start my presentation, and the topic of my presentation for today is the role of human rights in bridging the gap of digital divide. As you know that in the 21st century, digital technologies offer unprecedented opportunities for access to information, freedom of expression, human connectivity, technological innovation, as well as multi-stakeholder engagement. So we understand that while new technology and new development bring so many advantages to those who were able to access the internet, it has also left many people behind it, and the gap between those who access to the internet and those who don't access become known over the last 2 decades as the digital divide. The digital divide is a term that refers to the gap between the demographics and regions that have access to modern information and communication technology, and those who don't or have restricted access. Because as we know, technology can bring so many benefits to human rights movement nowadays, but the need to focus on the challenges and look at the dark side of the technological advancement as they relate to human rights is really urgent, since it poses major challenges, especially with regard to the freedom of expression, privacy, online disinformation, which is really publicized during the pandemic, and the safety of human rights activists, journalists, accountability of the states, and deepening the inequalities, especially deepening the inequalities between gender, and also it brings so many other divides. Therefore, there's a really huge concern is growing that government commitment to their human rights obligation is increasingly would be weakened during this era, since most of the governments violate, we can say most of, but so many states violate the human right in the name of the security, national security, and so on. So in a very short period of time, digital technology has transformed both the means through which human rights exercise and the means through which human rights are violated around the globe at the same time. So our understanding of how to protect human rights in the digital context is really significantly underdeveloped. And therefore, it's been argued among the scholars that internet access deserves human rights protection, since internet access affects how individuals exercise their other established rights. And in another part, is that because of the increasingly important impact that the internet has on the individual and society, it can affect on other fundamental right of the individual. So the consequences of the digital divide include isolation, and it can affect on mental health, education barrier for the, especially we could see it during the pandemics, which education increasingly move online, and it worsens the situation of the deprived people, and also it's worsening the gender discrimination at the same time. So, what would be the causes and types of digital divide? It's in order to understand that, it's important to mention that digital divide was initially attributed to underdevelopment and was perceived as something temporary that would disappear with the advancement of the technology. However, the divide still persists despite the mass marketing of the electronic devices with internet access. And the causes can range from include it from the high price of the devices to the lack of knowledge about the use or the lack of infrastructure for their access. So in this regard, I'm going to review the types of digital divide. As you can see it in this slide, we have 3 types of digital divide: access divide, use divide, and quality of use gap. For access divide, it refers to the possibilities that people have to access to these sources. This is where socioeconomic differences between people and between countries came into the play, since the digitization required some kind of costly investment and infrastructure for less developed region, and for rural areas is difficult. And then the next one, we have the use divide, which refer to the lack of digital skill, which impedes the handling of technology. And to give an example, for example, the ITU points out that there are 40 countries in which more than half of their residents don't know how to attach a file to an email, which you can see it as one of the divide of the digital divide. And the final one, the quality of use of gap, which sometimes we have the digital skill, and people have the digital skill to find their way around the internet, but they don't have the knowledge to make good use of it and to get most of the internet. For example, with regard, we can mention it as a regard to access to the quality information. And moving to the consequences of digital divide, technological disinformation is a form of poverty and social exclusion. It creates some kind of social exclusion and depriving some of the citizens from their essential resources for development and wealth generation. We have seen this a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic, as many students and workers found it very difficult to work from home and follow classes. We had students climbing to the tree to just access to the online classes. Therefore, here you can see the main effects of digital divide. Definitely, this list is not exhaustive, but rather is illustrative, that we can see that there are some of the consequences of the digital divide. First one, which is, I believe that one of the most important one, is the lack of communication and isolation, which people in remote areas who don't have access to the internet are disconnected from the world, and something similar happened to urban residents who are disconnected, which causes again the social isolation. And lack of communication and isolation dealt with the right to freedom of opinion and expression, and because online platforms provide the means to reach wider audiences, including the traditionally or marginalized communities. And they facilitate the active practice of the freedom of opinion and expression through online spaces. The second one is barrier to studies and knowledge, which we had it during the coronavirus crisis, and it has shown that the effect of the digital divide in education is really huge, and teachers and students out of the loop because they lack sufficient technology and digital skills. And it also increased the lack of knowledge by limiting access to the knowledge. Then we have the centered social differences, which the digital illiteracy reduce the chances of finding a job and accessing to the employment. And finally, the gender discrimination, which, as we saw at the beginning, the digital divide negatively affect women more than men, which violates the principle of gender equality. Now we want to see that how, what is the role of human rights in digital divide. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the accompanying instruments and also covenants, including the ICCPR, we know that the responsibility for upholding, safeguarding, and promoting human rights and fundamental freedom falls on the nation states. Individuals, however, have a right to promote and to work to protect human rights and fundamental freedom at national and international level. And therefore, a number of instruments and initiatives have been adopted, especially in recent years, to help private businesses comply with the human rights and fundamental freedom. This is because private sector actors, they're playing a very crucial role in organizing, managing, and providing access, regulating, and even populating the internet. And such kind of responsibility and roles includes those pertaining to enabling the connection to the internet, designing and maintaining hardware and operating system, sharing, hosting the information, provide facilities and even searching the information and producing the information. So digital divide led to the violation of some of the basic rights, such as right of freedom of expression and freedom of opinion, as I mentioned earlier. Therefore, it's essential to to understand how digital technology is actually affecting human rights in practice as well. Given the fact that the creation of United Nations and international human rights is based upon the nation system, the human right always existed in tension with the concept of state sovereignty and geographical territorial boundaries. So according to this framework, the primary human rights relationship is between government and the people they govern it. So governments have the obligation to protect the right of those within their territory and provide security. And therefore, this means that governments are bound by the commitment not to violate human rights through their own action, as well as a duty to protect individuals from human rights abuse by others. So several dimensions of the new digital ecosystem challenges the conception of governance, and we're starting to include and to discuss about the role of human rights on the four digital gap or the digital consequences that I mentioned earlier. So starting with the communication problem, as we know that the resolution on the promotion and protection and enjoyment of human rights on the internet adopted by the UN Human Rights, by the UN Human Rights Council, and this resolution is co-sponsored by so many countries from all over the world, and it's adopted in 2021. And this is the fifth in the series of resolution with the same title, which started from 2012. And under this resolution, Human Rights Council recalls the obligation and the primary responsibility to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms lie with their state. And such kind of responsibility to respect human rights as set out in guiding principle of business and human rights is a big framework, and it emphasized on the importance of access to information and communication technology for the full enjoyment of human rights and strengthening the democracy, the rule of law, and also for attaining the sustainable development goals for the response to have an inclusive and resilience recovery from the coronavirus diseases pandemic, and recognizing the need to bridge the digital divide. So the resolution has a thematic theme of bridging the digital divides. This is an issue which has become more important, especially during the COVID-19 and pandemic. And the resolution tried to build on and consolidate international human rights standards related to the theme, and with the language on issues including the internet access, shutdown and online censorship, net neutrality, and encryption. The resolution also reaffirmed the landmark declaration of the same right that people have offline must also protected online. So the resolution urged states to prioritize action at the national level to implement the commitments of the resolution in four main areas. First, it started with digital divide, and as I said, then followed by internet shutdown, the censorship, and also the encryption. Since the internet has become essential for most of us in our everyday lives, and it enables us to work and communicate, it's a key enabler for the exercise and enjoyment of many other human rights. However, a lack of adequate infrastructure or connectivity usually leaves behind the poorest communities, and the digital divide shows its discriminatory effects in all its strengths. Therefore, the resolution urged states to implement these commitments by taking concrete measures to expand internet access, the affordability, such as promoting infrastructure sharing and open some kind of spectrum management, and creating and enabling an inclusive regulatory environment for small and especially non-profit operator. It also encouraged the core group to go further in future of the resolution by explicitly mentioning the concrete measures to apply and to implement the resolution. For the internet shutdown, the resolution called on states to unconditionally cease of the violation of international human rights law, and it condemns internet shutdown and online censorship, and calls on the government to cease such measures. It also makes progress by mandating the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights to prepare a report on internet shutdown and analyzing their causes, their legal implications, and their impacts on a range of human rights. So as we can see, this is the first time that the resolution make an explicit reference to internet shutdown, and joining other resolutions which are contending with this issue, such as the recent resolution on freedom of, the freedom of opinion and expression, to shut down all this kind of activity. And the resolution of freedom of opinion and expression, which has been adopted in 2020, it's co-sponsored by over than 50 countries from all over the world. And it also reaffirmed the right to freedom of expression, which constitutes one of the essential foundation of democratic societies. And it also contained a positive language on specific issues related to the right of freedom of expression, right to information, internet shutdown, responses to misinformation, counterterrorism, encryption, anonymity tools, and safety of the journals. And as we can see, these are all the elements of the freedom of expression, and it's really important to be, to be protected. On the next section, which talk about, which I put it as the internet shutdown, we can see that the examples around the world that countries constantly shut down the internet. For example, the case could be seen in Iran. It started in November 2019 that the internet shutdowns and disconnected the people and citizens from international internet, while they used the disconnection to attack people, to arrest people, and kill thousands of people during the nationwide protest. And since then, Iranian government has issued a number of other internet shutdowns during the protest. And currently also they do the same things, and the Iranian government are doing the same things. The ongoing protest started around 1.5 months ago. And a few days after the commencement of the protest, the government shut down the internet, and people have limited access to the internet. And most of the times people are completely disconnected from the internet from morning until afternoon, and for just for a few hours they can be connected again and back to the virtual world. And this includes such kind of activities includes a near complete internet shutdown in specific countries that the protests erupted against the local council. And as I said, the internet shutdowns occur, ongoing blocking and filtering the website. I mean, besides the internet shutdown, they have filtering website, filtering some specific social media platforms such as Instagram, then Telegram, and a few other social platforms like even YouTube. It's completely, blocked, and people couldn't access to the virtual world. Which can only be accessed, people can access it, but only by using the VPN. And these measures have been facilitated by Iranian National Information Network. And it's so crucial. You can see that there was a, although it's really, I mean, it's really difficult to, to prosecute the person in charge. And contrary to the popular belief, there was no centralized switch off from the global internet. And instead of, we can see that the scale and length of Iran shutdown were a result of a government serving each internet service provider direct order to disconnect their user from the international traffic. This case can be seen in other countries. We can see it in India or China, that they can, disrupt the connection of their citizens and people from the internet. And it's exactly a case of internet shutdown, as it's, as it's stated, and try to publicize by the resolution and try to condemn such kind of activities. Therefore, recommendation has been made by civil society, NGO, and council to hold all states accountable for such measures and to ensure that all the relevant resolution, including on the promotion, protection, and enjoyment of human rights on the internet, explicitly condemn not just the internet shutdowns, but also website blocking or filtering, denial of service attacks, and other measures that render ineffective access to telecommunication network, mobile services, or any other social platforms that have been, blocked in different countries. And other features which have been emphasized by the resolution is the net neutrality, which is the first to address the issue of net neutrality, and it calls upon the states to ensure that net neutrality is subject to a reasonable network management and prohibit attempts by internet access service provider to assign priority to certain types of internet content or application for payment or other commercial benefits. As you can see, this statement also echoes a recommendation that previously made it by the special rapporteur on the right of freedom of opinion and expression, which have been made in 2017. And it required internet service provider to integrate human safeguards and mitigate human rights impacts. And the basis of all this kind of report, which have been made by special rapporteur on digital access provider, is according to the United Nations guiding principle on business and human rights, which all of us know about it. And net neutrality and the principle that all network traffic should be treated equally and regardless of its origin or the service provider. And this is a very key prerequisite to ensuring that equal and non-discriminatory exercise of the right to freedom of expression and free flow of the information is going on. And without it, provider can use their control over the internet infrastructure to block, slow, or prioritize access to certain form of content over other content. Therefore, states are being urged to take heed of their new commitments, including by perhaps passing specific law which ensure that the internet service providers fully respect the net neutrality. Then we have the other part of the resolution. It's emphasized on the net neutrality, which this resolution started since the Snowden revelation of mass surveillance in 2013. And it recognized the resolution recognized the technical solution to secure and protect confidentiality of digital communication, including measures for encryption and anonymity, which is so important to ensure the enjoyment of the full of human rights, either online or offline. And the language of the resolution mirrored the progress made by other resolutions on the same issues. For example, the resolution on privacy in the digital age, which emphasizing on the right to privacy. which interlinked to, to economic, social, and cultural rights, such as equality and non-discrimination, as one of the examples of the right. Yep, as I mentioned, this resolution is started since the Snowden Revelation 2013, and consequently, the United Nations General Assembly and UN Human Rights Council have considered the resolution on privacy in digital age every year, each taking turns to pass the text. And the series of resolution has progressively elaborated international standards on how to secure the right of privacy online, including, contending with the risk posed by new and emerging technology. And the latest one adopted on 2020 at the General Assembly, which co-sponsored by around 69 or 70 countries, which again, it reaffirmed the fundamental importance of the right to privacy and international commitment to ending all kind of abuses and violation to privacy with other fundamental human rights, including freedom of opinion and expression, peaceful assembly and association, equality, and non-discrimination. Therefore, it's generally the resolution calls on the states to not only refrain from interference with these technical solutions, but to pass a specific law to recognize that individuals are free to protect their privacy of their digital communication through technology. However, it's necessary to be ensured that encryption is addressed in operational paragraphs in the future, in line with the resolution on the privacy in digital age. Okay, then we have the education. As we know that we have lots of, we have a few conventions that protect the right of education, and in all this, since the advent of the COVID-19, learners in different primary schools, secondary schools have been forced to adopt to online training, and the lack or absence of access to the internet in a digital world has a severe impact on the childhood development. Such kind of right have been emphasized under regional treaties as well. However, we could see that how the right to education has been violated, particularly during the pandemic, and the majority of schools in developing areas in many countries were not geared to address the challenges presented by the online training. And one of the solutions would be for private sector internet service provider to provide internet access to all households, and the government definitely should prioritize and allocate funding to this to such kind of activities. And then the final one, which is one of the most important causes, is the gender discrimination. As it has been emphasized in the ITU, most recent estimate indicates that the global internet user gender gap has grown increasingly, and today internet penetration rates remain higher for men rather than women in all regions in the world, with the estimated gap between men and women being particularly and substantial in least developed countries. So the human rights implication of the gender digital divide are that women are excluded from particularly full in public and social life, and as such they are unable to fully exercise their human rights either online or offline, and the gender digital divide exacerbates existing inequality and in discrimination in the society. And without meaningful internet access, women are not able to fully realize a range of human rights such as freedom of expression, seek to have, access to the information, and so many other basic rights. As you can see that the internet become a critical space for women to access to relevant information, and the digital divide put them behind their basic rights. So as we can see, national laws are definitely not sufficient, and they fail to recognize the such kind of violence that women experience offline and online. But human rights, the recent resolution tried to provide some kind of protection, or at least encourage the countries to include and to implement a specific law in order to address all these kind of violations.
Thanks to Dr. Paradis, I don't have to explain too much about the theoretical framework and the international frameworks looking at how access to the internet is considered a human right. In fact, we saw in many emerging economies and transitional countries coming out of systematic dictatorship or conflict, that one way to leapfrog development is actually and also bridging information and knowledge gap is to actually go straight into information technology. And that's what we saw in Burma, Myanmar, when the country started opening up in 2011, that most places that didn't have landlines, where they had to wait for 10 years to get a landline installed, started to actually use mobile phones, smartphones, and started accessing the internet in a hurry. I think when we start looking at that, we start to understand that it's very quickly, it's very fast for many communities. And this is ironic. If we look at Burma, Myanmar, it had very low access to electricity, let alone technology. But the political will and the enthusiasm of the population to be connected to each other and the outside world saw many people jumping on and seeing a smartphone, a way of connecting to each other and the outside world as a priority, as an economic priority. And we are also seeing it during this time of conflict. I just wanted to share how people in Myanmar, despite all the challenges and despite the internet shutdowns, the electricity shutdowns, the trend now of charging people with terrorism for information or comments that they might make on Facebook and social media, that has not stopped people from trying to communicate with each other and give out human rights documentation. So if we look at this, in the first year of the coup that started in February 2021, we started to notice the trend that really shocked us, that by the end of the first year of the illegal junta, the number is actually higher than Syria or Yemen or Afghanistan or Iraq. In fact, now more than 18 months or 19 months into the coup period, we have seen the only situation of armed conflict that has the higher number of figures than Burma, Myanmar is Ukraine. So we already start to see, where does this information come from? It comes from the ground. It comes from people who, while under attack, are documenting what is happening to them and using their communications access to send out the information as soon as possible. So it helps many of us get a very big, important picture of what is going on in the country. And this is how we could also look at the conflict intensity in the first year of the coup, disaggregating the number of attacks and airstrikes, by state and region, and then contrasting it per capita. So we could see that in the first year of the coup, if you were a resident of Karenni state, you were 32 times more vulnerable to military attack than if you were in Rakhine state, where the Rohingya genocide took place. So all of these kinds of facts and figures and data was very important in trying to raise the alarm at UN Security Council and at in ASEAN, and this also influenced very much the perspective of the Malaysian Foreign Minister Saifuddin Abdullah, who became one of on what was happening during the what is happening during the Myanmar crisis. So if we look at this, it looks just like facts and figures. And where these facts and figures came from, it came from people on the ground using the internet, using digital technology to document, verify, and send out the information. So we could see in some ways, the urgency of the situation motivated people to prioritize. This is what is most important of them, documentation and communication, so that groups can send in humanitarian supplies so that the international community could wake up and realize and recognize the seriousness of the conflict that was going on the ground. So when we talk about that, that's why I wanted to show how human rights activists and affected communities were leaping through, basically overcoming the digital divide in order to get the information across. You know, a few months ago, we were running a workshop on engaging with international financial institutions, because a group like Justice for Myanmar and ALTSEAN, my organization, and more than 200 organizations actually wrote to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the Asian Development Bank within a few days of the military coup to warn them not to give any money to Myanmar, since the bank accounts are now controlled by the military regime. That resulted in $13 billion being frozen. This, by Malaysian or Singaporean standards, 13 billion US dollars may not be that high, but in Myanmar standards, this was approximately 12% of the GDP. So we were able to prevent that amount of money from going into the military junta's hands. And as we can see, since now, whatever revenue goes into the military junta hands is used to launch airstrikes against civilians and artillery attacks against civilians. So this was something that happened very quickly, because there was a digital technology that people were willing to use a VPN and secure technology to communicate with each other and to coordinate very important peaceful actions that would contribute to civilian protection. If you go on the internet and hashtag what's happening in Myanmar, you will see about 750 to 1,000 posts a day. It is quite overwhelming. But one of the big organizations in terms of presence, Justice for Myanmar, is a decentralized network of activists. And they were formed in February 2020, but became very active after the coup. And now they have 167,000 followers. So, and what they are very well known for is their investigations into the members of the military junta and the military's economic interests. And this actually has allowed advocacy, the data, the hard evidence that they collect allows for advocacy for targeted sanctions against the military junta's economic interests. And if you look at the far right, I hope you can see it. This is just a posting from today on the Twitter. And you can see these photos are lightning strike, or what they call flash protests to show peaceful resistance to the illegal coup. And this is happening even while the military is burning down people's houses. They are still going out and taking photos and putting online to show that they are peacefully resisting this violence. And actually, in 1 month, there is an average of 500 peaceful protests, these flash protests happening all around the country to show that we are still against this military junta. People are refusing to pay taxes to the junta. In many parts of the country, they have set up alternative civilian administrations to run local communities because they refuse to acknowledge that. And the way they are able to do this is to actually use digital technology to coordinate. And if there's no electricity, that's fine. If there's, they will wait until electricity comes on, or they have solar power, which is back to my point about the workshop on engaging with international financial institutions. One of the participants was an old friend I had not seen in a long time. So I asked her, can you turn on your camera? I just want to see you for a few seconds. And when she turned on the camera, we could see her face like a white ghost and total darkness behind her. It was at night. So I said, oh, where are you? She said, I'm in the jungle near the Thai border. I'm using Thai internet to connect. And the whole of today, I powered my solar power so that my phone has enough battery to join this workshop. So when we hear this, and you just go, oh my gosh, there are people, in fact, probably people who are joining this course from Myanmar, who, if they are in Myanmar, are going through VPN to try and get online, even though they may not be electricity, trying to use whatever they can to connect, to learn, to update, to share information and to get information. Then we start to see these are some of the inspiring cases where we actually see how the digital divide can be breached. So while Dr. Paradis was talking about how there's international systems, UN, and all of us working in those spaces, trying to ensure that the digital divide is breached, that the gap is filled, that women and girls are capacitated in terms of being able to access information. We could already see in some extreme cases, people have no choice. The urgency of the case is such that they will actually do whatever they can to stay connected. This happened even before the coup. During the COVID pandemic, it was very slow for the Myanmar authorities to act. They kept denying there was COVID, and it was people who were using online spaces to warn people how to protect themselves, how to make sanitizer, how to make masks because they couldn't find it in the market, how to sew their own masks and so on. So we could see all of this kind of information and public service being taken care of by civil society groups who could not wait for the government to act. So these are, I also wanted to share another interesting project that we did so that you can see these are examples. I'm using Burma, Myanmar as an example because it is in a state of civil war at this time. But if we go and look at other situations around the region, you will find that even in the poorest, most remote place, if the community sees that they need to stay connected, they will do whatever they can to make it happen, even though the governments might not be so keen. So if you look at this project, which actually we started to work on it, began in 2020 when COVID happened. People were saying, oh, you were very quick to respond, but actually we had planned to do this in 2019. It is a project called Bridges MM to connect multi-ethnic youth in Myanmar and multi-ethnic youth from Myanmar who were living in other places with each other, so they can talk to each other and can work together, but also to they may not normally have access to. For example, the UN Special Rapporteur, the chair of the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, and other prominent people where young people don't have a chance to meet. So in the first semester in 2020, we had participants from all around the world who were either different ethnic people in different parts of Burma, but also people who had resettled from Burma to other countries and who wanted to connect with each other. It's quite interesting because at this time, there was still a very big divide between the Rohingya young people and the Burmese, the Burmans and the Shan ethnic and the Mon and the Rakhine. And more people started to join the program in 2021 and in 2022 because they said, this is our chance to meet Rohingya young people. And Rohingya young people were joining because this is our chance to connect with people outside our community so that we can become friends and we can share our situation. So we saw this was actually a very powerful platform. So people could, instead of having political dialogue, they can socialize and talk about their situation or their challenges and find ways to work together. So if you look at, so what we did was we actually, as part of that project, started to give small sub-grants to young people and basically say, you can use this money for anything, you just have to give us an idea of how you can work with someone outside of your ethnic community. And in this case, 2 young women from different ethnic groups said they would like to have a Facebook Live talking about the need to address discrimination in Myanmar society. And we said, okay, what is your budget? They said $1,000 US, because we are going to ask 2 media organizations to host the meeting for us. And then we want to give an honorarium to the different speakers who are coming from different backgrounds. And I said, okay, that sounds reasonable. So we sent them the money and they said, you have to give us a presentation to the main group about what happened. And when they gave the presentation, they said, oh, we had 168,000 viewers for our Facebook Live. And I said, are you sure it's 168,000? Maybe it's 16,000. And he said, here's our grab. Here's the screenshot grab. And here's the link to the Facebook Live. And I was so surprised that these young people working across ethnic lines could actually, with a small amount of money, organize a Facebook Live that attracted 168,000 viewers. Actually, a few months later, a year later, when I revisited the site, it had gone up to about 175,000 viewers. So they were able to reach so many young people just by, and maybe older people, to talk about discrimination just by working together. And, you know, in this kind of situation, we would not have had that opportunity if we had not utilized the digital technology. So that's just to start off the discussion and let you know that despite the challenges, it is still possible to connect. It's still possible to do all of these things because people are resourceful and they're very determined. But just imagine how much more amazing things that the communities in our region can do if governments and if international organizations really substantially started to address the digital divide in a systematic way. Then we could see a stronger sense of community, but we can actually see potential solutions being developed and shared much more rapidly instead of disinformation and misinformation. We can already see there are many ways in which civil society and affected communities themselves are empowering themselves despite the digital divide, despite attempts by governments and even companies to restrict people or to violate their rights by selling off their personal information and their personal data. But, you know, the resistance continues because people understand our fundamental human rights for survival and livelihood ultimately depends on our ability to communicate and inform each other. Thank you.
I believe that it's a bit difficult, but I think the role of the private sector, NGOs, and civil society is really important to encourage the government to include such kind of activity, to include especially particular laws, because in terms of the universal human rights system, it's complete, and it's at the first truly global is transboundary framework, and it is peacefully well established and well suited for the internet ecosystem as well. And the only points which remain is the activities of the NGOs, the civil society, to bring the issues to the government and to convince them that we have some problems, especially for the communication, the gender discrimination, and also as I exemplify, we could see around the world that governments condemn and violate the basic human right of the people by restricting their access to the internet. That's why the role of civil society is really important. And sometimes I think when we have the problems like we have in my own country, I can say the role of other countries and the role of United Nations is so important, because as the protest is going on and as the restriction is going on, people cannot do anything, and also international organizations just try to encourage the government to stop such kind of violation. But as we can see, the government still doing it and still persisting on their violations. Yeah, that's right. I totally agree with you. And I believe that most of the times the people, the marginalized or deprived people are the one who, receive more such kind of violation rather than, big cities and capital cities. In different countries, we could see the same situation, that although they provide, as you said, they provide lots of things, lots of resources to other cities of the country or states, they being marginalized for their basic rights. Inequality, especially in rural area, it's more than big cities. If we just consider the examples, for example, even for the internet shutdown, which we can see it in specific countries during the political uprising, even in China, India, Iran, we could see that such kind of equality and internet shutdown, internet restriction is more on small cities, on rural areas rather than big cities, because normally such kind of protests, such kind of human rights violations is being started within these rural areas. And that's why state government try to, condemn all these activities and try to, restrict their access to internet to prevent it from publicized in other countries and around the globe and international sphere.
The digital divide being reinforced by short-term economic considerations. For example, saying there's 10 people on that remote island, why should we actually invest in having them being able to communicate? Well, in some countries, like Australia, for example, the food security is very much dependent on farmers spread out over a wide area. So most of the state level governments actually subsidize internet connection for these farmers in order to warn them and to support them, provide information on dealing with pestilence, threats to crops, what is selling in the market, how to protect their crops and their ability to maintain their livelihood, because the society depends on the farmers for food. So this is one thing where actually it's a false economy to say, well, there's only a handful of useless poor people there, so let's forget about giving them access to information, when actually those people have some fundamental contributions. The other thing too is that we are living in a very climate sensitive and disaster prone region. Tsunamis, earthquakes, floods, typhoons, cyclones, etc. So sometimes the front line of that are remote communities, especially those in remote islands. So there's geological surveys, as well as local communities can be the early warning system. It would be kind of horrific if people didn't get the warning because they said the government decided, well, it's a handful of people far away, so let's not, they don't pay that much tax anyway, let's forget about them. And then the entire coast is besieged by a massive disaster because they didn't realize. But I think also we need to understand that technology has advanced, and technology in advancing has also become cheaper and more accessible. It is not relatively inexpensive to organize satellite internet access, which because of the technology that's available now, you could even use that. And that's what companies started to do when they are actually doing mineral exploration. They paid big bucks to develop that technology, and that technology now has become mainstream and becomes more available for poorer communities. So actually, there's no excuse, no economic excuse to maintain the digital divide. In fact, it's in a nation's interest, economic and security interest, to ensure that everyone has access to information technology. That's a good question, and it's a perennial issue, and it's also about the questions around freedom of expression and freedom of information. I think what is really important for us to do is to ensure, as part of our basic education, because the digital technology is so much a part of our lives, even for young children, that we need to be more savvy in terms of working out what is disinformation and what is misinformation. There are now very many websites that will do that for you. You can go and double check. There's even widely available services that can even help you trace the photos to make sure that you know this photo is not being misused. And I think one of the things which is particularly concerning is the sexual exploitation of women and young children on the internet. And this is where we really need to do a lot more work in terms of prioritizing those protections. But it is like, having a car. For many people, a car is a big liberator, because it gives you freedom to go anywhere without, and very convenient. But then a car can kill. A car, it can get you into an accident if if you're not careful. And the car is actually a financial drain. So, we need to actually think about, and also cars actually pollute the environment. So how do we balance what we need and what we want with what is sustainable for the community and for the environment is quite important. So if we're talking about access to information, let's not forget that before digital technology democratized our access to information and knowledge, information and knowledge was the domain of the very privileged and the very educated. I think we have to understand that. 100 years ago, you know, everyone will feel intimidated to challenge someone who is more well off than them, because it was also assumed that they were more knowledgeable. And how governments and even oppressive social systems kept people uneducated. So I think we need to also understand that it's not a zero sum, it's not either or. There has to be also an understanding that our laws and also our education needs to, our skills development need to catch up with the technology. We saw that the use of robots and the use of drone technology, scientists warned about how harmful science fiction. No one could make a Terminator, but actually we have Terminators now. They're called drones. Iran is actually making kamikaze drones that's being used by Russia in Ukraine. So we could already see, okay, we have to catch up with the technology. It's not something that we need to be afraid of, but we do need to understand when we are developing these technologies, there has to be a human rights lens in terms of how can the abuse of this technology cause human rights violations or deny communities their access, the enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights. I think we do need to have that lens. If not, we will be constantly trying to solve the problem after it took place. So I think this is why it's so important that the ASEAN University Network is doing, encouraging university lecturers and practitioners in higher education to consider how we would adopt and how we would incorporate a human rights lens in our work, not just even in terms of business and human rights. There are problems that happen and now they see, oh, we don't want to have that problem again. But we do need to start from the very base. That's quite a difficult issue, and that's always an ongoing struggle for those of us. You know, this is what we call the Netflix effect. If you have such good internet and you're watching Netflix, then you got no time to think about other things. But I would say that sometimes at different points in time, people become outraged or become quite angry. One of it is about a year and a half ago, when suddenly access to Twitter and Facebook went down in Bangkok and in Thailand, and then everyone became very upset and started accusing the government of trying to censor the flow of information. So I think you know, sometimes when we saw poorer communities or marginalized communities using digital means to further their cause, if they don't get domestic support, they try to get support by further abroad by communicating with the diaspora or with other like-minded communities and activists. We saw this happening on Burma, but we also saw it happening in Thailand during the height of the various movements in recent years, including through the Milk Tea Alliance, which is a very interesting online youth-led activism, where you can see them on Twitter. They're very prominent on Instagram and other social platforms, where they are using unconventional social means to organize themselves. So I think, you know, in the end, the middle class always gets involved when they lose something. This is what we've also seen, what we are also seeing in Burma. Middle class has become very active in resisting military coup because they were directly economically affected. And then also they saw the universities being shut down, the students and also people of middle class background being shot dead in the street by the military junta. So I think we have to understand that we cannot, there will always be a core of people who are very concerned and committed, but also, you know, there will be different times in when the privileged start to see that their rights are being affected, and then they will also start getting involved. So I think this is part of a cycle of how people organize themselves, and also the cycle of how social situations can affect or motivate or disincentivize activism and community building. But we don't need that many activists. We just need to have people who are concerned enough to pay attention. So I think we are heading into a time where more people are going to get concerned, because the economic fallout of the COVID pandemic and the impacts of the Ukraine war. And in this region, what hasn't yet been acknowledged is the impacts of the civil war in Burma, Myanmar. People will start to feel it in their pocket, the people who didn't really care in the past. And they are going to have to actually start paying attention. Not to mention climate change too.